right, everybody, it is Spooky Day, and originally I wanted to have a much more robust video for today. I actually had a 5-part video series that was planned, but if you've seen my main channel, you know that I haven't really had the ability to do what I want to do on my channel for a little bit, and that's kind of sucked. So, since that is the case, instead, I'm going to be doing the one video that I originally planned to build this entire month around, and, well, we're gonna just go with that. So without further ado, we are going to be talking about a very interesting commander, but with a very harsh deck building restriction. This is Olivia Crimson Bride, and the deck building restriction we are going to be working with for spooky season is going to be, well, only cards from spooky sets are allowed, and the main spooky sets are Innistrad sets and Duskmourn itself, and the supplementary commander product that came with these sets as well. These are the only things we are allowed, and we are allowed a budget of about $40. And I managed this one at closer to $30, but again, we've only got so much we can work with in the first place, so here we are. And while the original idea may have been to build out 5 commanders over the course of the Halloween week to fit this theme, we're gonna stick with the one that I was able to complete given everything else that's been going on. So without further ado, let's talk about Olivia Crimson Bride, but spooky! Olivia Crimson Bride is a Rakdos and 4 vampire noble with flying and haste, and whenever she attacks, you return any creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. And if you don't control a legendary vampire, you'll then exile that creature. It's a much more strict version of a finality counter before the printing of finality counters. Olivia is obviously a reanimator commander, but we need to have ways to make sure that creatures make it to the graveyard, and since we are going with an Innistrad-themed set, I figured we would also go with a vampire theme for Olivia, and again, this was the plan for 4 more commanders, and I may end up building those commanders out as their own decks in the future, but for now, we're gonna go ahead and go with what we have here. So, Olivia wants to see creatures touch the graveyard, and we want to have lots of vampires. So obviously, we're going to have to make use of lots of blood tokens. A blood token is an artifact that allows us to discard a card, sacrifice the blood token, and then draw a card. This is a fantastic mechanic that we would be able to expand on a lot without the deck's limitations, but since we are in these limitations, suffice to say, blood tokens will be used to fill the graveyard with lots and lots of vampires. And since vampires are our main source of power, our win conditions are going to be cards like Sanctum Seeker, which says whenever a vampire attacks, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life, or Necropolis Regent, which says whenever a creature you control deal combat damage to a player, put that many 1/1 counters on it. Cards like this are going to facilitate having a very aggressive combat-oriented game plan with our vampires. And we're also going to add in a Dying to Serve as a single token creator outside of the blood tokens. This way, whenever we discard creatures for our blood tokens, we will make a black zombie creature token. We're also using this because Olivia in the lore actually has these zombie butlers in her manor, so it really felt weird not to include them here, especially with how well they work with what our commander's doing anyway with the blood tokens. Well, our deck anyway. The commander's not a blood token commander. Let's also add in some thematic vampires, like Dominating Vampire, which takes control of somebody very quickly and gives them haste until end of turn, a lot like a Red Court vampire from the Dresden Files getting you hooked on their saliva. Dusk Feaster is a great reanimation target that costs less to cast if there are 4 more card types in your graveyard, but otherwise is just a 4/5 flyer that's a very safe target for Olivia. Vampire Nighthawk is a non-reanimation target as it's very tiny, but this can block dragons for us and also has lifelink, which is fantastic. Stormcrypt Condemned allows us to discard graveyard cards, which then become reanimation targets, to give all of our vampires 1/1 until end of turn, which can cause us to have a very large outswing when we need it. And Vampire Socialite has Menace, so a little bit of evasion, with the ability to give a 1/1 counter to all of the vampires that we control. And any vampire that we have that enters the battlefield after the Socialite also will gain an extra 1/1 counter. It's not quite the same as a full-blown Lord, but it's still doing plenty for what our deck wants. But that leads us to the meat of the deck, which is, of course, the blood token strategy. So let's go ahead and talk about each of these cards. These are all cards that either benefit from blood tokens or create blood tokens, with Wedding Security being our first one. Whenever it attacks, we can sacrifice a blood token, and if we do, then we put a 1/1 counter on the security and draw a card. Then we have Restless Bloodseeker. At the beginning of our end step, if we've gained life this turn, easy to do with vampires, we make a blood token, and if we sack 2 blood tokens, we can flip it into the Blood-Soaked Reveler, which gives us more abilities, like being able to strip our opponents of life by sinking mana into it. Then we're going to add in Strafon, Marrer Progenitor. At the beginning of our end step, we will create a blood token for every player who lost life this turn. Typically, this will be 3 players. Whenever Strafon attacks, we can sacrifice 2 blood tokens to put any vampire card from our hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, gaining indestructible until end of turn. This is the opposite of Olivia. Olivia is a no-setup reanimation commander, whereas Strefan is cheating the creatures from our hand instead with setup. Valdaran Bloodcaster has flying, and whenever it or another non-token creature dies, we make a blood token. And whenever we create a blood token, if we have 5 or more blood tokens, we can then transform her into her vampire wizard form. At the beginning of combat on our turn, up to 1 of our blood tokens will become a 2/2 bat creature with haste in addition to its other types, permanently. This token conversion can cause our board to get out of hand very quickly. Olivia's attendants can make blood tokens for all the damage that they deal, and they can also deal 1 damage to any target, giving us a pseudo form of removal. Glasscast Heart says whenever one of our vampires attack, we make a blood token, and we can also pay 1 life to make vampire creature tokens. Finally, we can sacrifice the heart and 13 blood tokens to burn everybody for 13 life and then gain 13 life. A very, very powerful final nuke of a win condition. Gluttonous Guest enters the battlefield giving us a blood token, and anytime we sack a blood token, we gain a life. Camber the Plunderer has lifelink, and whenever a creature we control dies, we gain a life and create a blood token. Markov Enforcer says for 6 mana, if it or another vampire enters the battlefield under our control, this will fight any creature our opponent controls, giving us even more removal. And anytime a creature dealt damage by Markov Enforcer dies, we create another blood token. Falconwrath Forebearer has flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we make a blood token. We can then sacrifice 2 blood tokens to return this from the graveyard to the battlefield ad infinitum. Falconwrath Celebrant enters the battlefield, giving us 2 blood tokens, but is otherwise a 4/4 menace creature. Bloodtithe Harvester can turn our blood tokens into a kill spell. Bloodcraze Socialite enters the battlefield, making a blood token, and then when it attacks, we can sack a blood token to give it 2/2 until end of turn, meaning we can hit for 5 damage instead of just 3. Anji Maid of Dishonor, or Anye Maid of Dishonor, says that whenever she or one or more other vampires enter the battlefield, we can create a blood token once a turn. We can then sacrifice blood tokens or creatures to make every opponent lose 2 life and us gain 2 life. I'm going to be honest, I think that she's actually probably going to be the star of my own Aristocrat deck in Rakdos, now that I think about it, because of how powerful that kind of a sack trigger is in an already Aristocrat strategy. Oratorial Alchemy makes a blood token whenever it touches the board, and blood tokens we control become equipments that give creatures 2/0 and equip 2. This effectively turns them all into blood-forged battle axes. Belligerent Guest has Trample, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we make a blood token, and the Blood Fountain makes a blood token when it touches the board, and we can sacrifice Blood Fountain to get 2 creature cards from our graveyard to our hand for even more recursion on top of what our commander was already already doing. And finally, we're going to add in a Swiftfoot Boots to protect our commander from anything that might come our way. And that really does it for the core strategy of the deck. Lots of vampires, lots of blood tokens, and hopefully the idea to create a swelling host of these parasitic monsters to annihilate our opponents, with a little bit of lore flavor from Innistrad sprinkled in. But we do need a solid draw strategy, so let's talk about how we're going to draw through our deck. Again, with the limitations we are working with, I did find some pretty decent draw spells we can use. Ancient Craving is a favorite of mine, 4 mana for a draw 3 with minimal downside. Blood Pact draws us 2 cards and loses us 2 life. Cathartic Pyre deals 3 damage to a creature or a planeswalker, or gives us a Faithless Looting effect. Change of Fortune can discard our hand, and then we draw a card for every card we've discarded this turn. Use this in conjunction with lots of blood tokens to get a huge hand. Point of Discussion draws us 2 cards, loses us 2 life, and then makes a blood token. Florian says at the beginning of our second main phase, look at the top X cards of our library, where X is the amount of life our opponents have lost this turn. Exile one of those, and we are able to play that card this turn. Electric Revolution lets us discard a card to draw 2 cards, and even activates from the graveyard if we have to get rid of it with a blood token. Crossway Troublemakers give all of our vampires Death Touch and Lifelink, and anytime one of those swinging vampires dies, we can pay 2 life and draw a card. Read the Bones lets us scry 2, draw 2, then lose 2, and Succumb to Temptations will draw us 2 and cause us to lose 2 life. I'm very happy that the way that Wizards designs standard sets includes a lot of these generically okay draw spells, because in Commander, they all work phenomenally, and I'm glad I was able to scrape enough of these together to make the deck work. That said, let's remove some of our opponent's cards from the game so that we don't lose ourselves, yeah? In all of the spooky sets, I managed to scrap together about 15 very powerful methods of removal, and let's go ahead and talk about each of these. Abrade lets us blow up any artifact and deal 3 damage to a creature if we need. Bedevil can blow up artifacts, creatures, or planeswalkers, keeping the way clear. Bloodline Culling can give a creature -5/-5, allowing our deck to have access to removal that can get rid of indestructible creatures. Butcher of Malakir is a vampire that also has a Grave Pact effect, causing any of our opponent's creatures to die if our creatures die alongside them. Infernal Grasp is a basic destroy target creature, lose 2 life card. Henrika Dominathi is one of my favorite vampires in all of Magic, as she's got a multitude of powerful effects, making everybody sacrifice a creature, letting us draw a card and lose a life, or transforming her into the Infernal Seer, which gives her flying, Death Touch, lifelink, and the ability to give all of our creatures with any of her keywords 1/0 until end of turn. Then we have Feed the Swarm, and Jesus Christ, the new Duskmourn version of this is fantastic looking. I love that artwork. Then we have Cemetery Gatekeeper, which says it enters the battlefield exiling a card from somebody's graveyard, giving us access to graveyard removal. And whenever a player plays a land or casts a spell, if it shares a type with the exiled card, we will then have the ability to deal 2 damage to that player afterwards, eking out a slow win condition. Patron of the Vein blows up any creature when it touches the board, and whenever a creature and opponent dies, we can exile it and then put a 1/1 counter on every vampire we control. Rakdos Charm allows us to exile people's graveyards, blow up artifacts, or make token players cry by making them take 1 damage for every token they control. Reaper of the Abyss has Morbid, which says at the beginning of each turn, if a creature died this turn, then we blow up a non-demon creature. Being from Innistrad and Demon Deals being the reason that Innistrad even got vampirism for the first place means I needed to include at least 1 demon in this deck for flavor, and Reaper of the Abyss definitely fits the bill. For those who don't know, on Innistrad, the Markov family made a deal with demons in order to prevent themselves from starving due to a worldwide famine. But the way that the demons made them unable to starve was by granting them immortality at the cost of an immortal thirst for human blood. They then almost caused an apocalypse on their own planet by wiping out most of humanity, and Soren Markov, whose transition into a vampire ignited his Planewalker spark, had to actually come back to Innistrad to get his family to stop slaughtering all the humans, because, you know, eventually their entire ability to survive would disappear, and that's kind of what the demons were going for in the first place. They do give nothing but Faustian bargains after all. Then untimely malfunction from the new Valgavoth precon, and also, actually it's not in the precon, it's just in the Duskborn set, but it should have been in the precon. This can blow up artifacts, this can change the targets of spells, and this can cause creatures to be unable to block. Withering Torment can blow up enchantments or creatures. Voldarin Pariah lets us sacrifice 3 other creatures to transform her into this lovely Eldrazi being. I needed to make sure that at least one Eldrazi was also in this deck, because in the story of Innistrad, there was Soren Markov, who I mentioned got his Planeswalker Spark and needed to go back to Innistrad to save his people. But one of the things he did while he was around and perusing the multiverse was teaming up with Nahiri on Zendikar to basically prevent the Eldrazi from leaving Zendikar. But when Soren did not show up to face the Eldrazi threat when it finally started breaking out of its prison in Zendikar, Nahiri decided that she was going to go on a vengeful rampage, and she led Emrakul, one of the biggest, baddest Eldrazi of all time, to the plane of Innistrad to start infecting everybody there and consuming them and turning them into the Eldrazi host. So during the events of Eldritch Moon, you could see several members of the Voldarin vampires, the Markov family, all of them just getting transformed into these Eldrazi nightmares. I wanted to have at least some of that representation here, and this was a good enough card to manage that. Whenever this creature transforms, we can make an opponent sacrifice 3 creatures, and then we have a 6/5 flyer we can proceed to keep bludgeoning people to death with. Finally, we have a Vile Mutilator. As an additional cost to cast this, we sack an artifact or a creature or an enchantment. It's got flying and trample with 6/5, and whenever it touches the board, each opponent sacks a non-token enchantment and then sacks a non-token creature. This card eliminates 6 cards off of the battlefield the minute it touches grass, which is fantastic. I love this thing so very much. Finally, we have 3 board wipes. Blasphemous Act came in one of the precons, so we have access to that, dealing 13 damage to all cards on the board. Burn Down the House was in the Innistrad set, or Midnight Hunt set, and it allows us to deal 5 damage to every creature and each Planeswalker, which uniquely does not hurt a lot of our stuff, since even if we lose some of our vampires, we can just reanimate them afterwards. And Vampire's Vengeance deals 2 damage to each non-vampire creature, and then creates us a blood token as a benefit afterwards. Whew! That was a lot, but the deck does have plenty of ways to deal with problematic cards to make up for the limitations we had in building it. Now we need to talk about the mana and ramp, which is a little harder to find stuff for, but thankfully, one of my favorite cards of all time was able to be included in this deck, thanks to its being printed in Innistrad. Thankfully, in terms of ramp and mana, since we are allowing ourselves some cards from the Innistrad and the Duskmourn precons, we do have access to some fairly decent ramp. We are going to be running 9 ramp pieces, beginning with an Unstable Obelisk, giving us the ability to blow up any permanent if we need to later in the game, while also being a 3-mana rock. Solemn Simulacrum gives us access to any type of basic land we need from our deck, and Soul Ring is an obvious inclusion since we are no longer at a very concise budget. Then we have the 2-mana rocks of Fire Diamond, Arcane Signet, Charcoal Diamond, and Rakdos Signet that are basic includes in any deck that is in these colors. Then we have Command Sphere and Honored Heirloom as our 3-mana rocks outside of the Obelisk. Command Sphere can sack itself to draw a card, and Honored Heirloom thankfully was printed in Innistrad, so one of my favorite mana rocks that allows us access to removing people's graveyards is completely viable in this deck. Past that, moving on to the mana section, we have 8 forests and 11 swamps with 11 dual lands to speak of. Sulphurous Springs was printed in the Duskmourn precon, so we've got access to a Pain land, Foreboding Ruins as a reveal land, Exotic Orchard and Command Tower as our generic dual lands of the deck. Dragon Skull Summit comes into play untapped if we have a swamp or a mountain. Smoldering Marsh is our Tango land that is searchable if we upgrade the deck. Shadowblood Ridge is a wonderful filter land. Rakdos Crenarium can bounce lands from our board into our hand to give us a land that can tap for 2. Tainted Peak gives us both of our colors if we have a swamp. Unclaimed Territory can just name vampires and tap for any of their colors. And Valdaran Estate can also give us any color we need in terms of mana, as long as it's for a vampire. Past that, we are limited to a small selection of fetching lands, Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, and Ash Barrens that 1-for-1, and Myriad Landscape that can ramp us in terms of lands. And finally, with utility lands, the Duskmourn Precon had a Bojuka Bog in it, and the Gaia Reach Sanitarium was also in one of the Innistrad sets, so we do have access to this as well, letting every player draw a card and discard a card afterwards, which we will try to make the most use of since we are a reanimation deck. That all said, that is a lot of text. That's a lot of stuff to take in. So let's go ahead and play the deck and have some fun, shall we? Let's talk keepable hands. In this deck, the thing you want to be looking for is a couple of pieces of mana, ideally 2 or 3, a way to discard cards out of your hand, and a ramp piece, as we do have a fairly expensive commander. Draw is wonderful if you can get it, but because the deck has so many blood tokens, it's perfectly acceptable if you only get a blood token for draw. With our opening hand, we have 2 lands, a ramp piece, a good reanimation target in Markov Enforcer, a couple of kill cards with Bloodline Culling and Infernal Grasp, and the Blood Crazed Socialite to give us our first blood token. This is a somewhat reasonable hand, but a bit risky. So we'll open up with the Terramorphic Expanse, crack it, and go into our library to grab a mountain, and then once that is on the board, we'll pass turn to our opponents and move to turn 2. On turn 2, looking at our setup, we can go ahead and drop a swamp down, and if our opponents play a creature we worry about, then we Infernal Grasp it and take care of it. Leading on to turn 3, where we can drop Tainted Peak down, and we have Florian Valdaran Scion available to us. At the beginning of our second main phase, he'll allow us to dig through our deck and get some more options. We could ramp with Command Sphere, but honestly, getting Valdaran on the board this early may actually be the better play. Leading into turn 4, where we'll play a Swamp per turn. Well, actually, let's not play the Swamp per turn. Let's go ahead and see what we have. Valdaran is probably staring at 3 people who have access to creatures. So we're going to tap 3 mana and use Bloodline Culling to get rid of one of the creatures who could have blocked him, and then punch him at somebody to deal 3 damage. This allows us, at our second main phase, to look at the top 3 cards of our deck and determine if we want one of these right now. Looking at these, the only ones we could play are the Ash Barrens and the Mountain, so let's go ahead and play the Mountain, leaving the other one available to us for later. The other ones go on the bottom of our library, and then we move into turn 5. This is where we get rewarded for smoothing over our mana with that swamp. Now, looking at our board, we need to make a couple of choices. We can play the Valdaran Bloodcaster in order to start out with getting out a vampire on the board and maybe even get closer to being able to flip it. And if you look at our setup, we actually can do that along with the Command Sphere. So let's go ahead and pay 3, drop the Command Sphere on the board, and then pay 2 to get the Bloodcaster on the board, and then swing Faldhorn at someone and see what we can get off of that. Honestly, with our current setup, we don't have access to an extra land right now, so we're gonna go ahead and not worry too much with that ability unless we get something we can pay 1 mana for. And looking at our top 3, we don't really have anything that I'm super concerned about, so that can all go to the bottom of the library, and then we can hit turn 6. Now, looking at our setup, people will have board states, so Florian is not going to be able to keep punching people in the nose. However, we do have the ability to play Markov Enforcer, and we can use this to fight a creature our opponent controls, clearing the way and making our first blood token of the game. With that blood token created, we actually have the ability to go ahead and punch in with Florian and our Valdaran Bloodcaster in order to look at the top 5 of our deck and see what we can grab. So let's go ahead and look for a land, and we've already found one with the Exotic Orchard. So we'll play that as our card of the 5, and then throw everything else to the bottom of the library. Looking at our setup, we have an Evolving Wilds in our hand, but we don't need to cast it, so we're going to crack our blood token to get rid of this blood-crazed Socialite and draw a card. This gives us a better land for the following turn, but more importantly, we can use the creature we just dropped in our graveyard for Olivia. So we move on to turn 7, and we've drawn a Bedevil. We can safely play a Smoldering Marsh, but I think it would be better if instead we just tapped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and got Olivia on the board. And we use Olivia, well, Markov Enforcer says when another vampire enters, we can have this fight up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. Let's clear the way once more, and then punch our opponent out with all of our creatures, summoning the blood-crazed Socialite from our graveyard and giving ourselves access to yet another blood token. And with Markov Enforcer having killed another creature, then we have access to yet another blood token in reserve. This means in total we will be doing 5, 11, 14, 17 damage to a single player, allowing us to exile the top 17 cards of our library and looking at whichever one of those that we want to play. Honestly, we could just play a land, but we could play something that costs 2 mana at this point. And looking at the top cards, we already have a pretty good contender with that Swiftfoot Boots. So let's go ahead and speed this up by saying we play our Smoldering Marsh, tap 2, and get our Swifties on the board, and we'll just do a full library shuffle just for mechanical reasons. Technically, we would reveal all 17, but that would take a while, so we're just going to go ahead and shuffle the library and pretend that we did this the correct way. Now, it is very likely that nobody is going to allow Olivia to stick around now that they see that there's a Swiftfoot Boots and potential for that follow-up play. They see the blood tokens on the board, so all it takes is us getting a good vampire in our hand, and we've dealt about 25 damage so far, so realistically, Olivia is probably in the command zone, and our blood-crazed Socialite is exiled thanks to her ability, which is unfortunate, but it does mean that our Valdaran Bloodcaster will have created 1 more token for us. So let's go ahead and make that and put that there available for us to use. We've drawn Strafon, but we don't have anything in our hand that really warrants using him. So let's go ahead and pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And let's let Olivia touch the board once more. We can punch everybody with this setup to reanimate something from our grave if we had something here. And we have the blood tokens to get things in our grave. All we're doing right now with summoning Olivia is getting a trigger of the Markov Enforcer. And we're going to try to suit her up with Swiftfoot Boots. We're going to punch somebody in the face with her for the extra damage, but we're not really here for anything besides that. So we're going to dig until we hit a land, and then we are going to drop that on the board and use it to equip our Swifties. This is the importance of non-tapped lands, by the way. This is why they are so useful, because they allow us to sequence this way very consistently. Let's move to turn 9 and see what we would finally end up with. We've got the blood tokens here, and we've spawned another one thanks to the Markov Enforcer. So right now, we kind of have our pick of the litter. We can use multiple blood tokens this turn to churn through our cards. Let's go ahead and use each one to see what they would give us. The first blood token allows us to discard Strafon and draw Reaper of the Abyss. We'll discard the Reaper of the Abyss to draw Dusk Feaster, and we'll discard that to draw Blasphemous Act, which we will discard for the final thing, we'll get rid of our Belligerent Guest, as we don't really need that. Actually, we probably get rid of the Evolving Wilds at this point. We keep the Belligerent Guest. Now, we've got the ability to pay 2 and blow up a problematic creature on the board and swing everything at our opponents. This probably eliminates one player at this point just due to the amount of raw damage that's coming out, and we have two options. Either we can use our Markov Enforcer's ability once more by reanimating a vampire, or we can get this Reaper of the Abyss, since we've probably killed one creature at this point, and maybe we can use the Reaper of the Abyss to clear out whatever else is on the board. If a creature died this turn, which it will have thanks to the Markov Enforcer, then we can destroy any non-demon creature. We can use this to keep clearing the way for future turns. If we had a turn 10, then we would just swing out with everything for lethal damage, reviving Streffen to kill a creature, and letting Reaper of the Abyss kill another creature on the board, assuming we don't get hit with a board wipe. And if we did, then we would just accept that all of our creatures would die, Olivia would be spawned again, and the Markov Enforcer would be our first reanimation target. All in all, it is very simple reanimation strategies that just allow you to play cards for free and focus on removing things from the board. That's what Olivia's good at, allowing you to just focus on your deck's game plan instead of having to worry about everything else. If I don't have to cast big mana creatures, then I can use that mana on removal spells or extra things that I can cast, that other vampires, other things that I'm not having to spend mana on. And that's just kind of the advantage of playing a commander like Olivia. That said, let's go ahead and talk about some upgrades you can make to this deck. Obviously, the power level of this deck is going to be limited by the cards we are allowed to play in it. Since this is restricted both by budget and also by set, we really only have so many options. So if you are to actually start upgrading your deck, then there are a few things that I would consider must-includes, because once you start upgrading it, you're moving outside of Innistrad. Obviously, the MDFCs of Fel the Profane, Hagra Mauling, and Malakir Rebirth are easy slot-ins, as they don't really take anything and allow your deck to still function irrespective of their existence as cards. MDFCs are great because they are both spells and lands. It doesn't matter what situation you're in, an MDFC can probably pull you out of it. But outside of that, some other upgrades I would probably run are Angie Falconwrath, as she gives you a more draw and discard abilities, Anawan the Ruin Sage to make people sacrifice non-vampire creatures, Art Priest of Shadows to double up on your reanimation triggers, Bloodletter of Aclazotz to eliminate enemies faster, Drana the Last Blood Chief to give you more reanimation, Drana Liberator of Malakir to pump up your entire board, Champion of the Dusk to give you even more draw power based on your vampires, Buried Alive to find more ways to get vampires in the graveyard, along with Ripples of Undeath, which does the same thing and also gives you access to a draw spell, and the Malakir Blood Witch also gives you access to a win con, since when it touches the battlefield, every opponent loses life equal to the vampires you have. It's a mini Gary, effectively. We can also supplement the reanimation strategy with Victimize to sacrifice creatures and filter them better for us, since Olivia does take those creatures away if she dies. Sacking one of her reanimation targets for 2 other reanimation targets will protect them from being exiled. Yahenni's also a vampire that can protect ourselves from our own strategy, since he can sacrifice our vampires at instant speed before Olivia gets rid of them. And Zargas, the Thief of Heartbeats, allows us to give Death Touch to all of our board, making it far less likely that people will block them. And that's really all I've got for this deck. It's honestly a really fun deck to begin with. Vampire Tribal's already something I don't play that often, and Reanimation is one of my favorite commander strategies, as I love being able to just monster reborn random stuff from the grave and have it function. I also really enjoyed the very thematic style of this video, and I wish I had time to do more this time around. But hey, maybe next Halloween I'll have a little more to work with. We'll see. That all said, I do want to know what your thoughts are in the description below, or in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and please, if you really want to support my work, then maybe head over to Patreon and give me a follow over there as well. I also do Twitch live streams, Not always Magic the Gathering related, but certainly always community and gaming related now. So please head over there too if you want to hang out with me in real time. That all said, thank you all for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you have a happy Halloween. Insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.